A long time ago, in a land far, far away, a little girl by the name of Amy looked into her mother's beautiful sky blue eyes, and she found them radiant. She went to bed that night, and many nights since, her prayer to the God out there was this: "Dear God, please give me beautiful blue eyes like my mom." Because Amy was not blessed with the beautiful blue eyes that she adored, because her eyes were almond brown. And she would pray and she would plead with God often to ask her for blue eyes, to be like her mom, to be captivating in the same way her mother was. And yet God never answered her prayer. Her eyes remained brown. She didn't feel betrayed, but she did feel sad about this, because she wanted the blue eyes so very much. And yet God overruled her prayers. In his great kindness to her, he chose not to give her the desire of her 7-year-old heart. And she didn't know why. All throughout her childhood, all throughout her teenage years, she didn't know, and she got over it. But eventually, Amy Carmichael ended up in India as a missionary. And she was responsible for dressing up in a disguise as one of the Indian women. She would tan her skin with tea leaves. And in her disguise, she would go into Buddhist temples and she would rescue orphans from the oppression of the Buddhist religion and the Buddhist monks. Had the Lord granted her the request of her heart as a 7-year-old to have blue eyes, she would not have been able to pretend and act like an Indian woman. They would have known she was a foreigner. Had he not overruled her desire, her fervent childlike hope, with his merciful wisdom, then those children would not have heard the gospel from her lips. Her prayer, although it was genuine and it wasn't sinful, was not a wise prayer from God's perspective. She didn't know it, but God did. And God, in his mercy, overruled her prayer for his greater purposes. And it was good that he did so, wasn't it? And we've all been there. We've all prayed things, whether it's blue eyes, rock-hard pecs, or a bigger bank account, or better health, or children, or even a spouse, whatever it is. We've all been there, and we've all had that yearning prayer that isn't necessarily wrong, but it isn't necessarily right or wise. And we've watched on our knees as we've been praying, sometimes with tears streaming down our cheeks, as God continues to consistently say no. And he overrules our desires, and he works beyond our prayers, and we go out of our way to enact that what we think what we want. And yet God consistently shuts down and says no. And we accept it, but we don't understand it. And then, of course, there are requests that end up being from a sinful motivation. But most of our prayers, we don't intend to pray with a sinful motivation. They aren't wise. And God, out of love, not because he's grumpy and a killjoy, out of love, he says, no, my child. It may take years, sometimes for some things it may even take eternity before we understand God's reason. But there is a reason. And we will see that it will be good, it will be right. And this morning we come again to the book of Judges, where we meet Samson once again. And we're going to make Samson make a decision, a demand of his parents that is unwise. And in fact, his decision is sinful. It's unwise and it is also sinful. And yet, in God's great mercy, he does not smite Samson down for his sinfulness. What he does is he overrules Samson's sinful decision to bring about his intended result. He's willing to use, not to cause, but to use Samson's sin to fulfill his purposes. Which tells us that even sin, even our failures, even our weaknesses are under the sovereign superintendence of God's awesome power and will. And as we come back to Judges chapter 4, turn there if you would, as we come to Judges chapter 14, we're going to learn that we're very like Samson. We share in his foolish desires and we pray in his foolish weaknesses. And we're going to learn that our hope, therefore, must be the same as Samson's. Our hope is the wisdom of God's good sovereignty to achieve his will despite our sinfulness and our weakness and our rebellion. God achieves that which he says he will achieve. So Judges chapter 14, let's learn this lesson along with Samson. Verse 1. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. We're going to divide our passage into 4 acts this morning, and the first act is that Samson spies a lady. He spies a lady. Last week, you'll remember, we were introduced into the life of Manoah and his wife, who were promised a child despite this being a season of punishment by Yahweh. Now we zip forward in time a little bit and we come to Samson as an adult. And his roving eye is seeking someone to marry, a bride, a wife. And in his travels as a judge of Israel, he makes his way to Timnah, which is a Philistine city near the Sorek Valley. And his wandering eye catches the glimpse of this beauty, a woman who appeals to his masculinity. But it's very clear, the text makes it abundantly clear, she is not an Israelite. She's not of his clan, not even of the people of Israel as a whole, which ought to be a problem. Not just for Israel, but remember, Samson is the judge of Israel. He's been given the position over Israel to do what? To smite the Philistines. So there's a lot of context here that suggests Samson, look away. But despite this small and exceptionally important detail, he returns home and speaks with his father and his mother, and he does not gloss over the fact she's a daughter of the Philistines, does he? He jumps right in there. That's one of the first things he says. And then he tells his parents, rather aggressively, get her for me as my wife. Now, if you're Manoah, his father, you're thinking, this is not a good decision. Granted, Israel is marrying and intermarrying at this time, we believe, but this is a season of idolatry and a season of sinful and doing evil in the sight of the Lord. But this is Samson, the child of the promise. He's meant to weaken the power of the Philistines, not marry into them. And so they ask him, is there not one, not woman in all of our clan or our people who would suffice, who would make you happy? Must you take a wife from these uncircumcised Philistines? And you should hear the scorn in those words. They are uncircumcised. They are unclean. They are the dirty oppressors. But Samson was a confident boy, wasn't he? This is what I want. She's right in my eyes. So what's Manoah to do? He loves his child of the promise. But then verse 4, which is a little bit complex, we have an editorial note that says this was from the Lord. Now, it's a little complex to try and navigate and understand what's happening here, because it is sinful and wrong for an Israelite to marry into the pagan nations. We know that from the law. For one, it goes against the law found in Exodus 34, where God says that intermarriage with pagans leads to idolatry, which is exactly the opposite of what Samson's meant to do, lead the people back from idolatry. For another, as we've seen throughout Judges and throughout Ruth, it will jeopardize the inheritance by mingling the lines between the Israelite and pagan nations. So it's doubly dangerous. And yet at a surface level, verse 4 appears to be saying God is causing Samson to sin for the greater good. That's not what's happening here. What God is doing is that God is going to permit this to happen the next couple of months, as we're going to read, to use his man, his vessel, by overruling Samson's sinfulness. The Lord who is seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. He's not causing Samson to sin, but he's going to use Samson's sin. And this speaks to the sovereignty of a holy and mighty God. That even the sinful decision of Samson can be used to bring about God's good purposes. He's going to use Samson's sinfulness, as we'll see, to undermine the power and the might and the presence of the Philistines. And he's going to distract them from further advancement by finding an adversary in Samson. And Samson will find himself up to the task most of the time. So God is not causing Samson to sin. He's going to use Samson's decision to bring about his intended purposes. And then we see that there is some significant application here, but I think the key application is this, that we must beware the lust of the eyes. This brings us all the way back to Eden again, doesn't it? Do you remember when we were in Genesis? In the garden, Eve was tempted by the serpent. What do we read? She looked, and she saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes. So she took of it. Similarly, when Abram and Lot split up, do you remember what happened? It was Lot's greed, fed by his eyeing the land and seeing that one part of the country was good for produce and good for wealth, and one was really not that good at all. And so the lust of the eyes caused him to move one direction and send his uncle packing another direction. And it was this decision, fed by the lust of the eyes, that led Lot into the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the list could go on. Judah and Tamar, Potiphar's wife, Israel and the golden calf, Israel, all the seasons of idolatry that we have here. In Judges, our eyes lead us into sin. And there's a strong application here with Samson as to what we look at. Our eyes are in many ways the window of the soul, not because when you look into someone's eyes you see all happy fairies and unicorns, but because what you see is that our eyes take us where our heart wants us to go. What we gaze at, what we look at, what we lust over not only impacts our heart, but is shaped by our heart. And this obviously applies to sexual temptation. Of course it does. That's why Job makes a covenant with his eyes not to look and to lust over a young virgin. But it's not only the area of sexual temptation that's fed by the eyes. And I think we forget this. This week I was watching YouTube, videos of a music band I like, and I had 4 advertisements come on offering me Ponzi schemes, which seems a little excessive. Every single one of those advertisements had the following ingredients. They had a guy with a manicured beard and a nice three-piece suit. They had a table full of dollar bills. They had a nice Lamborghini or a Porsche, some fancy car, and there was women walking around scantily clad. What's the message? Do you want a life like this? Where you could have everything you can imagine? I didn't listen to a word he said, but the image stuck. Because he was playing to my lust of the eyes. He wanted me to buy into his scheme based upon what I saw. Our culture is good at preying on the lust of the eyes. We're experts at it. As with Lot, jealousy, bitterness, greed, and pride are all sins that are fed by the roving eye. We look at the success of others and we grow jealous. Why don't I have clothes like that? Where's my trophy spouse? Why don't I have a car that's expensive? How come they get to eat in the fancy restaurants? Why is their kid well behaved in church? This is why John commands us to beware of the lust of the eyes. It's not just sexual temptation. It's not just a male disease. It impacts all of us. It's the paradigm of sin that we see revealed in Genesis. It opens the soul, the heart, the mind to sinful fantasies about people, about possessions, and about privilege that are ultimately deadly vices that seek to destroy us. And in Act 1, we see that in spying the lady, Samson allows himself to be governed by what he sees, not by what he knows he ought to do. His eyes are driving his decisions, and so he derides the good counsel and pleading from his parents, and our eyes lead us to do the same thing. It is unrestrained sin, guided by an individual morality. If it feels good, do it. It's what I want, so long as I'm okay with it. And that is the language of our culture, isn't it? And so, Christian, our key application from Act 1 is this. Although Samson spies the lady, are we guarding our souls by covering and protecting our eyes? Where we go with our eyes is where we'll go with our feet. So Samson spies the lady. Secondly, he subdues a lion. Let's go to verse 5 as we see him subdue a lion. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came towards him, roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on, eating as he went. And he came to his father and to his mother, and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. So we watch as Manoah and his wife and Samson, they all head towards Timnah again. Some time has passed, and they're going now to arrange or try and bargain with the woman's parents to arrange the wedding. And they get to the outskirts of what seems to be Timnah, and Manoah and his wife, they go on, leaving Samson in the vineyards, which is probably unwise for a man who's meant to have a Nazaritic vow. He's not meant to be anywhere near grapes, unless he eats them and breaks his vow. And as he fidgets and ponders and walks around the vineyard, his parents slowly walk on towards Timnah. But as he's walking around the vineyard, we're left to wonder, is he breaking his Nazaritic vow by eating the grapes? We don't know, but we're left to speculate. Anyways, time passes, the sun continues to rise, and it's high, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a young lion, probably a little larger than a cub, who has been stalking him, jumps out and attacks him, and Samson is unarmed. But the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Samson, and in his strength he tears it in pieces. This is cool, this is gross, but it is really cool. what was likely to happen is he grabs the lion by the hind legs, and then with the pure strength of his biceps, which is, that's impressive, he rips it from top to bottom. Isn't that cool? Isn't that gross? It's what you do when you're preparing to cook a young goat. Literally pulling it apart. He doesn't tell his parents what had happened. You kind of wonder if they wondered what all the red stains on his garment was, but he doesn't say, and they don't ask. Eventually they return and they say, come and meet the woman. And so this is probably the first time he's actually spoken with her. And so they've agreed a bride price. She's been purchased effectively. And he comes down and he talks to her for the first time, most likely. And he says, yes, she is right in my eyes. I have chosen wisely. She's beautiful to him. And now from talking to her, he understands she is going to make me very happy. She's a good catch for him. Samson, the God-appointed Nazarite judge of Israel, this pagan Philistine woman, she is right in his eyes. Notice that emphasis again. So eventually the bride price settled. They depart back home, and we see the joy in Samson's face, and we see the misery in Manoah's. Days pass, and the wedding week arrives. Samson returns to Timnah to meet his bride, and out of curiosity he returns to the vineyards because he wants to see the carcass. He notices bees flying around it, so he gets a little closer, and inside they've made a hive, and there's honey in it. Now remember that a Nazarite is meant to come into contact with dead bodies. So, as a good Nazarite, as a good Israelite, what does Samson do? He not only gets close, he not only opens it up to have a look in, he puts his hand into the rotting carcass, he pulls out the honey, and he eats it. You don't need me to tell you that's gross. And then he gives some to his parents who were presumably nearby. Doesn't tell them where it comes from, but they eat it as well. Now, they didn't most likely take the Nazaritic vow, so they're probably not sinning, but they are made unclean because they should not be in contact with things that are dead, and they've eaten from a corpse. It's one thing for Samson to marry a foreign woman. Yeah, that's bad. It's forbidden for all of Israel, but all of Israel have kind of been slack on the law. But this is Samson intentionally, proudly, individually breaking the law. And so the application from Act 2 is rather clear also, isn't it? Samson, having been driven by the lust of the eyes, is now driven by the lust of the flesh. He's driven by his own desires. He doesn't care about his vow before God. Doesn't care that he's meant to be Yahweh's deliverer for Israel. He cares not about being holy and ceremonially clean. He cares about his own desires. And so he's willing to eat this honey despite the law, despite his vow, despite even his parents. One compromise leads to another and another and another. And this is I was going to say beautiful. This is a powerful metaphor for sin, isn't it? This is what sin looks like. It looks sweet. It looks good. It may even taste good in the moment. But it is like honey from inside a rotting corpse. Smelly, fly-infested, disease-ridden. It is disgusting. It's a lie. It looks good, but when you take a step back and you look at what's happening, you look at what you're doing, you look beyond the bees and the honey, you see the rotting flesh of the animal, and that is just like our sin. Not only does sin itself be disgusting in and of itself, but it causes us to do disgusting things, wicked things. And it all begins by one compromise and another and another and another. It began by one moment choosing to listen to the lying lure of Satan, that old raging dragon disguised as an angel of light, promising you all the things that you want while taking your hand and pulling you towards destruction. That old lie that you can be God in your own eyes, that old lie, it looks so sweet, but it is honey inside a rotting corpse. And Christians, sin appeals to the lust of our flesh. It appeals to our gratification. It wants us to be so deeply invested in Sodom and Gomorrah that to leave is extremely difficult. And it will rejoice at the costliness of our redemption. We must beware the lust of the flesh, because it is dangerous, it is disgusting, and it will draw us away from God, and it will bring us towards the grave. Beware the lust of the eyes. Beware the lust of the flesh. As Act 2 closes with Samson's deception, we are left to wonder and to ponder about this odd judge of Israel who cares not for Yahweh's law. What's going to happen to Israel? We move on to the wedding scene. So Act 3, Samson stumps the in-laws. Verse 10, let's read together. His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought him 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said, "Put your riddle that we may hear it." And he said, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. So the wedding arrives, as the young men did, Samson prepared a feast. And these would be lavish feasts with much wine and little sense. It will be a 7-day season of celebration, of drunkenness, and it would end on the 7th day with the consummation of the marriage between the groom and the bride. So it will be building up to this final moment when he takes his bride into the chamber. And Samson is hosting this feast, so it's another expensive commodity, another expensive celebration that Manoah has to pay for. And what you notice immediately is how quickly Samson acclimates to Philistine life. He's getting alongside the Philistines rather nicely for one who was commissioned by God to destroy them. So nicely is he getting along with him, in fact, that the men of Timnah provide him with wedding guests, because apparently he brought very few of his own. They give him 30 companions, and these men will become his friends over the next 7 days as they drank his wine, consumed his food, and enjoyed his expansive hospitality. They would become his best man, his groomsmen, boasting about him and basically raucously building up his ego so that everyone has a good time and the bride anticipates her new husband with eager anticipation and excitement. And Samson, caught up in all this fervor and boasting about himself, maybe drunkenly, we don't know, he sets his companions a bet. He bets them 30 linen garments of clothes, and that would be like underwear, really, and then 30 sets of fancy clothes. So it's expensive, but he has 30 companions, so it will be one set each. That's a lot. Cloth isn't cheap. It's not easy to come by or to produce, so it is expensive. But the Philistines, they're a clever bunch. And Samson, after all, he's one of the peasants, one of those Israelites that we're in charge over. There's a little bit of maybe superiority going on there, and they can't be too intelligent. We're the stronger power, and so they accept his bet to hear the riddle. And Samson says, "Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet." Now, Obviously, this is not a classic riddle. Let's be honest, it is kind of duplicitous and deceptive of Samson. Because at this point, literally, the text has said twice he has not told his parents. So literally, in the entire world, he's the only one who knows the exact circumstance that brought about this particular riddle. So it's a little bit sassy of him. Nevertheless, the bet was made, and 3 days the Philistine companions, they ponder and they think, and they may have gotten close because they understand that honey's sweet and that lions are strong. They may have gotten close, but they couldn't get it. Day 3 winds up, and unlike the wine, the mood is turning sour. They can't think of the answer because they weren't meant to. And Samson, well, he's increasingly confident. He's won the bet. He knows he's won the bet. It's a good week for him, really. New friends, new wife, soon to be fairly wealthy with nice new clothes. It's not going badly. But this is Samson betraying the pride of life, isn't it? He's become self-confident in the presence of his enemy. He's playing with those whom he was brought into this world to fight. Samson is playing with sin, and sin is like a virus. Its only intention is to cause destruction, and he cannot control sin. And we must not play with sin thinking that we can control it, thinking that we can keep it over here in this little corner just for me when I want to go out and play with it. We must kill our sinful impulses before they lead us to destruction. Samson is literally ingratiating himself into the Philistine people. He's marrying into them. He has 30 companions. He's literally playing games with them. This is not a good place for Samson to be as the judge of Israel. Be careful what you see, little eyes, because of where you'll end up. And we need to be reminded that Samson is not the hero of the story, and we are not the hero. We are not the hero of our own story. We need to be reminded that we need Christ, because we will not only dabble in sin, we will swim in the cesspit of sin. Pride sneaks in so subtly, and yet like a muscle it flexes and it grows until it is powerful. And our culture, just as it worships sex, it honors arrogance and pride. And we need one another to hold us accountable and to be firm in the gospel. Christian, we asked, are you guarding your eyes? We asked, are you fighting the flesh? Now we ask, are we playing with sin? Are we tempting and teasing ourselves by getting closer and closer to the flame like the moth until it's too late and our wings are burnt? Or are we resting in the power of the Spirit that helps us to fight that sin with all the weapons of the Spirit in a bloody conflict, as it ought to be? Act 4. Samson succumbs and loses. Let's read verse 15. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us to impoverish us? And Samson's wife wept over him and said, you only hate me, you do not love me. You've put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is. And he said to her, behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and shall I tell you? She wept before him for the 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard, then she told the riddle to her people. And the men of the city said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed down upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town, took their spoil, and gave the garments to those who had explained the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house. And Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. He succumbs and he loses. But talk about an escalation. It's like betting with the mafia, isn't it? Because they involve his bride, and frankly, of all of this, she has every reason to be upset. She's just been bought by Manoah for her son, and now it's taken a decidedly nasty turn. Her own townspeople are threatening to burn her and her father in their home. I mean, that's fierce. That's aggressive. And the reason for the depth of this threat is probably because, as we saw in the text, they think she's colluding with Samson to basically take their stuff, to make themselves rich, to give themselves all these nice clothes. So they think they're in it together. And we know that's not the case because no one knows except Samson, but they don't know that. And so they threaten her. If you don't tell us, or you don't get Samson to tell you, to reveal the answer to the riddle, well, we're going to kill you. So consequently, as a terrified young woman, maybe of 13, 14, or 15 years of age, she cries and she employs her tears to try and soften the arrogant and calloused heart of her hubby. And yet Samson is unmoved. And he tells her rather bluntly, no, I haven't told my mom and dad. Why would I tell you? Which suggests he hasn't quite gotten leaving and cleaving. But she ups the ante. And by the final day with the torches kind of lit behind her, she can feel their heat almost, she prevails upon Samson. And he thinks, it's the seventh day, the sun's about to begin to come down, I've pretty much won, now I can tell her and we can celebrate together. Which kind of presupposes he does not know of the threat. It seems like she hasn't told him she's been threatened. He simply thinks she wants to be in the know. And so he tells her. He succumbs to her. He thinks he's won. He tells her. And then they come back, and there's no longer that sour look. Now there's a smugness to the companions. And they even, rather arrogantly, put it into rhyme for him. And he flips his lid. He goes bananas. He's lost his bet. Yes, that's a lot of money. It is also, more importantly, a betrayal. His wife has betrayed him. And so in his fury, he responds in a very unkind way about his wife. He calls her a heifer. Now, that does not mean she's fat. He's not speaking to her physical appearance there. That in the ancient world, you did not plow with a heifer because they were like a puppy. They're unruly. They can't be tamed yet. They're not mature enough. And so he's basically saying, you plow with my heifer, you've manipulated her because she's so young and inexperienced and unknowledgeable. She doesn't know the ways of the world. So he's not calling her a cow in that way. I mean, he is still calling her a cow, so at the end of the day, it's still not terribly pleasant. But in his own way, he's calling her stubborn and untamed, while actually abjuring her of any direct responsibility. It's your fault for manipulating her. But he's still angry. And so the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, and in his fury, he marches about 25 miles away to Ashkelon, and he kills 30 men to steal their clothes. He went far enough away, obviously, that it wouldn't appear to be connected, and the message wouldn't be delivered that he was responsible for the murder, and that their bet was paid for by the death of their own kinsman. And this reveals a lot about Samson, doesn't it? Because Samson's not the type of judge that we've met so far, in many ways. But he's no Gideon. He's not even a Jephthah. Samson isn't a general. He's a lone wolf hero. He never leads armies. He never begins large conquests. And here he gets a taste of what he can do. God has used his sinful behavior, the lust of his flesh, the lust of his eyes, the pride of his life. He's used it to begin to undermine the power and the fear the Philistines have over Israel. He's being used by Yahweh to disrupt the natural flow of the Philistines. And soon he's going to become a very painful thorn in the flesh of the Philistines. He'll become the hero who revitalizes and undermines the power and oppression of the Philistines. He won't cause their demise, but he's going to begin the unraveling of their empire, just as the angel of the Lord had said. So he's done killing his 30 victims. He comes back and he kind of chucks the garments at them. But boy, oh boy, he's upset. And in a red-hot anger, he refuses to consummate the marriage, and he storms off back to his father's house. And because of the shame that this would be to this young woman who was the pawn in all of this narrative, right? She's the pawn. Because of this, the father, rather than allowing her to live with the shame of effectively being divorced before she was married, she's given to the best man to preserve the dignity of her father. It's a horrific, horrendous situation for this young woman, and we haven't even heard the end of it yet, as we'll see next week. But we see the folly of anger, don't we? Just as sin makes us do disgusting things, sin also makes us do stupid things. The folly of anger is that for Samson, for all of his pride of life, he's caught out by his own weakness. And in his anger, he kills 30 Philistines, pays the debt, but loses his wife. He doesn't marry her, yet he suffers further humiliation when she's given away at the hands of the Philistines. And now he has a personal grudge against them, as well as the oppression, which really doesn't seem to take much of Samson's concern. It's personal vendettas he tends to fight against, because his pride is damaged. And there's a great lesson to us here, because anger leads us to do very stupid, very bad things. When we lose our temper, we lash out, we hurt people, we say things that cannot be undone, unspoken, taken back. Anger, like the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, it makes us, in a word, it makes us stupid. And we must beware the folly of anger, because as Samson will learn, his lust and his anger and his arrogance will bring him nothing but trouble, nothing but shame. Eventually, it will bring about his own death. And dear unbelieving friend, you've listened to quite the peculiar narrative, haven't you? And yet, we see ourselves in Samson, don't we? We see in Samson's weaknesses our own weaknesses. Although the time is different, the sin's the same. Samson was led astray by focusing on the wrong place. How often have you found yourself desiring things because of where you look? Sex, pornography, wealth, poison, bitterly jealous of other people. Samson allowed the lust of his flesh to make him do disgusting things that dishonored God. And we do this all the time, lying, fighting, gluttonous habits, and drunken nights. Samson allows the pride of life to make him bet a lot on a silly riddle that ultimately cost him his dignity and ended his marriage before it began. Aren't we guilty of the same attitude? Forcing ourselves, for example, to work ridiculous hours for the things that we want, yet neglecting the people we have until they're gone. That's only one example of the pride of life. And Samson's anger, we can all relate to that red-hot anger that comes when we've been wronged by someone, whether intentionally or otherwise. We know what that anger feels like when you just snap. And dear friend, that's the point. We are like Samson. We are guilty of these patterns because we too are sinners. We sin because we're sinners. And sin, as we have seen, is something that God violently opposes because it is disgusting in His holy sight. It's more than just a mistake. It's an act of intentional rebellion that highlights our wicked rejection of a holy God. And our sin deserves judgment. It deserves the wrath of God. But there is mercy, and his mercy is more. Because while Samson was setting his gaze on an illicit woman, Jesus of Nazareth set his face like flint and would not be put to shame. His gaze was not upon his own gratification, but upon the cross that would save his people. While Samson was demanding his father obey his wishes, Jesus, the incarnate Son, was obedient to the will of the Father, even to the point of death on the cross at the hands of men. While Samson killed a lion cub and hid its body, only to feast from it later, Christ, the Lion of Judah, was killed by the sinfulness of man, and we will spiritually feast on him in a moment. While Samson was dabbling with sin and with the enemy, Christ stood at the tomb of a friend. And he knew the horrors of sin and evil and death. And he was agonized by what he saw in the death that has invaded his kingdom. And he went to war, not because of a personal slight, but because of his love for his creation. While Samson was waging a war against the Philistines because of his own humiliation, Christ was waging war on death itself to bring a people back from the grave. While Samson refused to love his bride, Christ died to win her. And dear friend, these are all things that point us to the majestic grace of the gospel of Christ. We deserve death. We deserve to be torn limb from limb like that lion because of our rebellion. Our sin is like eating from a carcass. Yet Jesus, in his mercy, took our place on the cross, and he was torn that we might be saved. He died that we would know life. If you repent and believe of the gospel this morning, placing your hope and faith in him, you can and you will be saved. You don't need to rely on your own strength or your good works. Christ has done it all for you entirely and perfectly. Will you this morning hear the gospel, set your face upon Christ rather than yourself? Will you humble your heart, resist the lure of the flesh, and heed the words of God? Will you turn your anger towards God into worshiping God? He is our only hope. He is the greater Samson, the perfect judge, and he can take you from feasting in sin to feasting with him. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we realize this morning the depravity and depth of our own sinfulness. We understand our broken nature. Father, we ask this morning that you would forgive us for the sins that continue to lead us astray. But we thank you that you have redeemed us through the matchless name, the perfect King that is Christ. For those who do not believe, we ask that you would open their eyes to see the truth of the gospel, that life is indeed your gift to those who believe, and life everlasting as your child. We thank you that in Samson we see ourselves. And we thank you that in Samson we see what Christ is not. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.